Hey guys, tonight we're taking you inside a candlelit spectacle so bizarrely over the top, so full of theatrical nonsense, you'll wonder if the ghosts were the only honest ones in the room. We're not talking about genteel parlour chats over tea or polite poetry readings. No, tonight's story is about what it was really like to sit in on a Victorian séance. The damp, coffin-scented drawing rooms, the table-rapping fraudsters, the occasional ghostly ectoplasm that looked suspiciously like someone's laundry, and the smell of too many unwashed wool suits in one overstuffed parlour. If you're enjoying our sleepy dives into history, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps way more than you know. And hey, I'm always curious where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is for you. Now lay back, close your eyes, and imagine the smell of candle wax, damp upholstery, and the faint tang of burning whale oil in the air. Because tonight, you're not just attending a Victorian séance, you're the eager believer who's about to regret every single shilling you paid to get in. You arrive on a wet evening, the kind of damp that clings to your coat and seeps into your bones. The city outside is a grey smear of gaslight halos and the hiss of carriage wheels on slick cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour, muffled by the heavy wet air. You follow the instructions scrawled on a folded card, the kind printed with a gilt border to give an air of exclusivity, and find yourself before a narrow townhouse with curtains drawn tight. The door opens just enough to admit you, and you're instantly wrapped in a smell that is equal parts overboiled cabbage, lamp oil, and the faint, sharp tang of mothballs. The hostess, a woman whose black silk dress gleams in the lamplight like the shell of a beetle, ushers you into the drawing room without a word. You step inside and are immediately aware of the heat. The air is thick, not warm in a pleasant way, but stifling, heavy with the scent of damp curtains and old wallpaper paste. The room is small, its walls crowded with sepia photographs in ornate frames. Their subjects, unsmiling Victorians with eyes that seem too sharp for the stillness of the image, stare out at you from the gloom. Heavy drapes block out the last of the street lamps outside. Only a few candles flicker on a sideboard, their flames struggling against the stale air, casting long shadows that twitch when anyone moves. In the centre of the room sits the séance table, a solid, dark wood piece covered by a thick cloth. You catch a whiff of something sour rising from it, like old gravy that never quite washed out. Around it are chairs of mismatched heights, close enough that your knees will certainly press against the stranger opposite you. This intimacy is not by accident. In Victorian séances, physical contact wasn't just encouraged but essential. Believers claimed it formed a chain of energy to help spirits cross over. Skeptics noted it also kept hands busy and prevented wandering fingers from discovering the source of mysterious knocks. A small harmonium crouches in the corner, its bellows patched with stiff paper. When it's played, the wheeze of its notes seems to fill every cubic inch of air, muffling your own breath. Instruments were a staple of séances, their eerie tones lending atmosphere and masking the noises of fraudulent trickery. In fact, in the mid-19th century, a surge of séances across Britain saw harmoniums, fiddles, and even tuned glasses enlisted to please the spirits. You take your seat and feel the scratch of the chair upholstery through your trousers. The fabric smells faintly of coal dust and lavender water, an odd combination that suggests it's been perfumed to mask something far less pleasant. Across from you, a man in a frock coat adjusts his gloves with jerky precision. To your left, a woman clutches a handkerchief already damp with anticipation, or nerves. Everyone seems to be holding their breath, waiting. The medium appears last. Draped in bombazines so black it seems to absorb the candlelight, they glide to the head of the table with deliberate slowness, their every move choreographed to command attention. A lace veil hides much of their face, but you can see the pale shimmer of powder on their cheeks, and the glint of eyes that seem to measure each guest. They begin by explaining the rules. No speaking unless addressed. Hands must remain on the table at all times. No breaking the circle once it's begun. The voice is deep and solemn, each sentence dragged out like a sermon. You note how the sound of the harmonium, still faintly humming from the last note, seems to underscore their words. The air grows thicker still. With the windows shut and so many bodies packed in, oxygen becomes a rare commodity. The candlelight wavers, and you feel a bead of sweat slide down your back. This is no accident. Victorian séances relied on the discomfort of their participants. The darkness, the closeness, the heat, all designed to heighten your senses until even the creak of a chair feels significant. You glance around the table. Everyone's eyes are fixed on the medium, who closes their own and lets their head loll slightly forward. The silence is broken only by the slow tick of a mantel clock and the faint sound of rain against the window. In this moment, you recall that séances were not fringe entertainment in Victorian Britain. Between the 1850s and 1880s, spiritualism had surged into mainstream society. Queen Victoria herself was rumoured to have attended, and popular magazines like The Spiritualist reported on ghostly happenings with the same breathless tone used for royal gossip. But the truth was more complicated. For every believer, there were skeptics waiting to expose frauds, and newspapers often relished both the sensational accounts and the scandalous debunkings that followed. The medium lifts their hands slowly, placing them palms down on the table. Their fingers are long, pale and tipped with nails so clean they seem unnatural in an age when coal dust found its way under everyone's skin. You place your hands beside them, your skin brushing the clammy palm of the person to your right. The circle is formed. There is a collective inhale, and then the medium speaks, their voice suddenly low, almost a whisper. They call upon the spirits to join, to make themselves known, to reach across the veil. The candlelight trembles, and the air seems to grow colder, though you can't help but think it's just your body registering the claustrophobia of the moment. The room holds its breath. Somewhere beneath the table a soft knock sounds. A murmur passes through the guests. Another knock, this time closer to you. You glance down but see only the heavy cloth hiding everything below. Your mind races. It could be anything, anyone. And yet, in the muffled darkness, the possibility, however faint, that it might be something else is enough to keep you still. Hands in place, lungs tight, eyes locked on the faint shimmer of the medium's veil. You're only at the threshold of this night, and the Victorian séance has not yet begun to show you its most absurd and unsettling tricks. The knock beneath the table fades into silence, as though the spirit has decided to lurk just beyond your reach. The medium tilts their head, veil swaying with the slow movement, and inhales sharply as if tasting the air for ghostly presence. You feel the pressure of the hands on either side of you tighten, not in fear, but in a sort of nervous excitement. Someone's perfume cuts through the scent of burning candle wax, sharp and powdery, mingling with the damp wool and stale parlor air until it becomes its own strange perfume of the séance. The medium begins to speak in a voice that is no longer their own. It is lower now, strained and vibrating with forced emotion. They say they are channeling a spirit. The circle leans in, captivated. The sound is punctuated by a soft, rhythmic tapping from beneath the table, not loud enough to be dramatic, but enough to be noticed. In the dim light, every sound is amplified in importance. Victorian mediums knew exactly how to exploit this sensory deprivation. They understood that the less you could see, the more your imagination would supply. This was the age before wireless microphones or special effects, yet they managed to create full theatrical performances in cramped drawing rooms. A sudden cold spot. Likely a hidden bellows pumping air through a gap in the floorboards. A spectral voice from across the room. Probably a concealed speaking tube. And those wraps under your hands? Well, more than a few mediums were found to be tapping with their toes. Your chair creaks as you shift, trying to get comfortable without breaking the circle. You're painfully aware that in Victorian England, séances were not just for the fringe-believing public. Distinguished figures, even scientists, attended regularly. Sir William Crookes, a respected chemist and physicist, famously investigated several mediums and declared some genuine despite the growing body of exposés. In this era, even the most educated minds were not immune to a little ghost hunting curiosity. The medium's voice changes again, this time rising in pitch and urgency. They say they can feel the spirit moving closer. You squint into the gloom. Something pale is beginning to take form in the shadows beyond the table, or so it seems. Then it moves, and you catch the telltale glint of candlelight off something damp. Ectoplasm. It emerges from the medium's mouth in a slow, deliberate spill, like some ghostly ribbon being drawn from their very soul. Gasps echo around the table. You can hear the woman next to you sobbing into her handkerchief. But the more you look, the more you notice how the substance hangs limp, glistening in a way that feels suspiciously earthly. You have read, perhaps in a skeptical pamphlet sold on street corners, about cheesecloth being the ectoplasm of choice for many a fraudulent medium. Hidden in the mouth before the séance began, then slowly drawn out at the opportune moment. In one notorious case, a medium was caught with a length of it stuffed in their ear. The air grows tense, as though everyone is afraid to breathe too loudly. The medium shudders, lets the mass fall into their lap, and moans as though the spirit has passed through them. They slump forward. A chair scrapes somewhere in the darkness, and a sudden burst of cold brushes your cheek. It could be the hand of the dead. It could also be a draft from the hallway. Victorian séance culture thrived on this knife edge between belief and doubt. It was not entirely about convincing the audience that the dead were present. It was about giving them just enough to wonder if they might be. Fraud or not, these moments were addictive. People returned again and again, paying for the thrill, for the slight possibility that their loved one might make contact. The economy of grief was as strong a force as any in the room. The table begins to tremble now. It's subtle at first, then grows until the surface quivers beneath your fingertips. You can feel the vibrations travel up your arms. In the darkness, it's easy to forget that human muscle is capable of subtle, sustained force without drawing attention to itself. In fact, table turning had been a full-blown craze in the 1850s, with gatherings across Britain and Europe where people swore the tables moved under their hands of their own accord. Scientists later blamed unconscious muscular action, but to those in the moment, it was compelling enough to believe. Then, without warning, the table lurches toward you, one leg lifting clear of the floor. A candle guttering on the sideboard throws a tall, twisted shadow across the wall. Your pulse quickens, even as your rational mind reminds you that the medium's foot is suspiciously close to one of the table legs. The harmonium in the corner sighs to life again, a low, wavering chord that makes the hair at the back of your neck stand up. The sound seems to come from nowhere and everywhere. You recall reading that some séance rooms hid assistants behind curtains or inside closets, ready to provide eerie sound effects. A cough in the dark, a sudden creak of wood, all the perfect seasoning for the spiritual stew being served. The medium rises slightly from their seat, arms lifting as though in prayer. Their veil flutters. You cannot see their mouth move, but you hear a whisper that seems to curl around the room, a voice speaking in halting syllables. It is a message from the spirit world, though you suspect the source is still very much breathing and alive. The guests around you are hanging on every word, some nodding, others clutching the hands beside them with white-knuckled conviction. A final rap echoes beneath the table, sharper this time. The medium sags, their head falling forward, veil brushing the table's surface. The harmonium's last note fades, the candles settle back into steady flames. No one speaks for a long moment, as though afraid the spell will break, but you already know it has. You keep your hands on the table out of politeness, but your mind is racing ahead, wondering what else the Victorian séance has in store. You haven't yet experienced the spirit photography reveal, the levitating trumpets, or the most audacious trick of all, the ghostly hand that you will soon feel brush your face. And in this suffocating parlour, you're beginning to realise that you might just be paying to be part of a very elaborate magic show. one in which the only supernatural element is the ability of a few clever Victorians to make you doubt your own senses. The medium sits slumped, their breathing slow and deliberate, as if recovering from some monumental spiritual effort. The room remains dim, the heavy curtains still swallowing the sound of the street outside. A faint draught snakes along the floor, carrying the cold, metallic tang of lamp oil from the hallway. You notice the candles have burned lower, the wax pooled in misshapen blobs that cling stubbornly to the brass holders. Without lifting their head, the medium announces that the spirits have not yet finished. Tonight, they say, is special. Tonight the circle will witness a more tangible manifestation, one that can be preserved for eternity. The murmurs start immediately. You've heard of this. Spirit photography. In Victorian Britain, it had become one of the most sensational offshoots of spiritualism. The process promised proof that the dead lingered. Pale, ghostly figures captured in portraits alongside the living. People paid dearly for these photographs, some clutching them for the rest of their lives as evidence of contact. And yet, you know that most of these images were nothing more than clever manipulation in the darkroom. Double exposure, smudged negatives, superimposed images. Technology had outpaced the public's understanding of it, and mediums and photographers alike took full advantage. The medium signals to an assistant, a young man in an ill-fitting suit with the glazed expression of someone who has done this routine too many times. He produces a cumbersome camera, the kind with a black cloth draped over its back like a funeral shroud. Its brass fittings catch the faint candlelight, gleaming briefly before he positions it in the corner. The guests are guided into position around the table, chairs scraping softly on the floorboards. The air smells of varnish and old paper as the camera is prepared. The assistant fusses with the lens, then retreats behind the black cloth. You hear the faint click and metallic whir of the shutters being set. The medium, still half veiled, instructs everyone to keep perfectly still. Victorians were used to this. Photographic plates required long exposures, and movement could ruin the image. But in the gloom of the séance room, stillness also provided ample opportunity for subtle sleight of hand. Somewhere behind the drapery at the far wall, you hear the faintest rustle. You imagine an accomplice, waiting for the cue to drift silently into the frame at just the right moment, their figure blurred by the low light and long exposure, until it takes on that translucent, otherworldly look. The Victorians loved this ethereal quality. In truth, the same effect could be achieved by having a person step into and out of the shot halfway through the exposure, something the average sitter would never suspect. The medium's voice cuts through the stillness, low and solemn, inviting the spirits to appear. The assistant counts under his breath, then triggers the shutter. For a long, heavy moment, everyone holds their breath. You can almost hear the camera swallowing the scene, imprinting it on the glass plate. When it's over, the medium declares that the spirit has been generous tonight, and that the photograph will be developed after the sitting. It will show, they say, the proof the living crave. Your mind drifts to the other props that had become staples of Victorian séances. Trumpets for the dead to speak through, their narrow ends hidden in shadow so no one could see the mouth producing the words. Tambourines and bells that rang in total darkness, passed from hand to hand with the skill of a pickpocket. And, most famously, the spirit cabinet, a curtained box or alcove where the medium would sit, bound with ropes, while mysterious hands emerged to wave or touch the sitters. In the dim light, these limbs appeared disembodied, but a more sceptical eye would note the ropes were tied loosely enough to allow the medium to slip free and return before the curtains were drawn. The medium now gestures toward a tall, narrow wardrobe in the corner, painted black and draped in swathes of dark muslin. This is their cabinet. It looms in the flickering light, its edges blurring into the shadows. They explain that inside the spirit will manifest more fully, protected from the distraction of the living. In truth, the cabinet provides the perfect cover for all manner of trickery, hidden compartments, trapdoors, or simply a space for the medium to swap in ghostly props without the audience seeing. The medium steps inside and pulls the curtain closed. The room waits, silent except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the harmonium's idle reed. The fabric stirs. A pale hand slips through the gap and floats upward, fingers curling slightly as if beckoning someone closer. It is the colour of candle wax, but the texture, if you could touch it, would probably feel like soft kid leather, the same material used for gloves. Many Victorian séance hands were made from papier-mâché, stuffed cloth or even carved turnips, all painted to a ghostly pallor. A collective gasp runs through the circle. Someone whispers a name, perhaps the spirit they hope is reaching out. The hand withdraws. The curtain sways again, and something small and white drops to the floor. A handkerchief scented faintly of rosewater. Another gift from the beyond, no doubt, though it looks suspiciously like the kind sold in any draper's shop. You recall the exposés published in the later decades of the century, detailing these tricks with a mix of admiration and outrage. The magicians who replicated them, the journalists who infiltrated séances to catch mediums in the act, the police raids that occasionally followed, and yet the séances continued. Because no matter how many frauds were unmasked, the demand for contact with the dead never faded. The illusion was too comforting, too enticing to abandon. The medium emerges from the cabinet, face pale and eyes glassy, as if they've just returned from some ethereal battlefield. They lift their veil just enough to reveal a faint smile that is quickly swallowed by solemnity. The curtain falls back into place and the circle is once again complete. The camera still sits in the corner, its exposed plate cooling in the shadows. You know that when it is developed, it will show something strange. Not proof of the afterlife, but proof of how easily human senses can be led into seeing what they most want to believe. You're still holding hands with your neighbours when the medium announces the next stage of the night. The spirits, they say, have more to share. And this time, the message will not come in photographs or silent hands. It will be spoken loudly and clearly in a voice that will make your skin prickle. And you're beginning to suspect that voice will be closer to the medium's own than any ghost's. The medium stands at the head of the table, their black bombazine gown pooling like a puddle of ink around their feet. The harmonium's last chord dies away, leaving a hush so thick you can hear the faint tick of the mantel clock, the settling creak of the floorboards, and the occasional shuffle of restless boots beneath the table. The smell of tallow smoke and stale wool is almost a presence in itself, pressing against your face, sinking into your clothes. They begin to speak again, but not in their own voice. The words are halting, almost broken, as though they're coming from a long distance. The accent is different now, thicker, older, oddly formal. The pitch rises and falls in unnatural ways, enough to make the hairs along your arm stand up despite the cloying heat of the room. You can't see the medium's mouth clearly in the dim light, but you can hear the sound coming from somewhere near them. Or is it? Victorian séance goers called this direct voice communication, one of the most convincing feats a medium could perform. The idea was that the voice of the spirit would manifest in the air itself, independent of the medium's own lips. In practice, this was usually accomplished with any number of ingenious and deeply unglamorous tricks. Hollow trumpets were the most common tool, their wide flared ends hidden in the shadows, and their narrow ends placed near the mouth of the speaker. In the dark, the sound seemed to float around the room, its source impossible to pinpoint. The medium now produces one of these trumpets, a long conical tube painted matte black to vanish against the candlelight. It rests against the table, angled away from the circle. They close their eyes and invite the spirit to speak through it. For a long moment nothing happens, then a low hum begins, rising into words. The effect is eerie, though you can hear the faint wetness of human breath behind it. The voice that emerges claims to belong to a man who died tragically, far from home. The sitters lean forward, hanging on each syllable. Someone in the circle whispers an affirmation, perhaps recognizing the details as they are spoken. You remain still, watching the trumpet tilt ever so slightly in the darkness, likely guided by a hand you can't quite see. This trick was so popular in the late 19th century that entire séances were built around it. In fact, an American medium named Etta Reet became famous for her trumpet séances, touring Britain and Europe in the 1910s, years after the height of Victorian spiritualism. Skeptics often noted how her trumpets always seemed to hover just far enough from the sitters to prevent anyone from touching them. The medium's voice changes again, becoming higher and more delicate as though a child is speaking. This was another staple of the séance repertoire. The spirit child, often used to melt even the hardest skeptic in the room. The tone is plaintive, the words simple, the delivery slow and hesitant. You can feel the room soften around you, the collective tension shifting into something more tender. Then comes the sudden shift. The medium announces that the spirit wishes to prove their presence beyond mere sound. The trumpet begins to move, sliding along the table's surface in small, jerky motions before lifting into the air. Gasps ripple through the group. In the gloom, you can't see any wires, but you suspect they are there, thin enough to vanish against the dark, strong enough to carry the trumpet's weight. Victorian audiences, already primed to believe, rarely looked for such details. When you wanted to think the dead were speaking, you did not search for knots in the drapery or glints of wire. You listened. You let yourself be carried by the performance. The voice grows louder now, filling the parlour in a way that feels almost physical. The trumpet turns, its mouth facing different guests in turn, as though the spirit is addressing each in sequence. The medium stands motionless, eyes still closed, hands on the table. The illusion is perfect, if you forget that ventriloquism had been a common form of parlour entertainment for decades before spiritualism adopted it. You're aware that by the late Victorian period, magicians and investigators had begun dismantling the direct voice phenomenon in public demonstrations. Harry Houdini himself would later make a career of exposing such frauds, pointing out how darkness and suggestion could convince intelligent people that the impossible had occurred right before their eyes. But here, in the cramped and smoky room, with the air thick and the light unsteady, you understand how easy it would be to believe. The voice fades, replaced by a low, lingering hum. The trumpet drops gently onto the table. The medium exhales slowly, their head lowering as though the effort has drained them completely. The circle remains silent, caught between awe and the faint discomfort of not knowing where performance ends and reality begins. In the pause that follows, you feel the heat of the room more acutely. Your collar sticks to the back of your neck, and your palms are slick against the wood beneath them. Outside, a carriage rattles past, the sound muted by the thick curtains. For a fleeting moment, you think you hear another voice, faint, breathy, right by your ear. You turn your head, but the only thing there is the dark and the smell of candle smoke curling upward into it. The medium finally opens their eyes, their voice returning to its normal register. They thank the spirits for their presence, their tone reverent, almost chiding the guests for any lingering doubt. Then, with a practiced flourish, they announce that the night's next demonstration will be even more extraordinary. This time, they say, the spirits will not only speak, they will move among the living. Your pulse quickens, though whether from excitement or the rising temperature in the parlour you can't be sure. You adjust your seat, feeling the scratch of the chair's upholstery against your legs. Somewhere, hidden in the shadows, the next trick is already waiting. A performance so bold it will make even the most sceptical in the room glance nervously over their shoulder. And you realise that the séance isn't winding down, it's just beginning to circle closer. The medium's announcement hangs in the air like smoke that refuses to clear. Around the table, the guests shift in their seats, some eager, some visibly uneasy. You can feel the heat from the candles now, not just on your skin, but in the air itself, thick and slightly sour with a mingled sense of wax, damp wool, and bodies pressed too close together for too long. Your shirt clings to your back. Somewhere beneath the table, the wood feels warm under your palms, the grain slick where years of hands have polished it smooth. The medium closes their eyes again and begins to hum, not a tune exactly, but a low droning vibration that seems to crawl into the spaces between heartbeats. The harmonium in the corner stirs to life, its notes soft, almost hesitant, blending with the hum until the sound is no longer entirely human. Someone exhales sharply beside you. Someone else squeezes your hand, perhaps in anticipation, perhaps in fear. Then it happens, a cold brush across the back of your neck. Light, fleeting, almost like the pass of a moth's wing. You jerk slightly in your chair, and the person beside you makes a sharp, surprised sound. Across the table, someone gasps. The medium's voice, low and even, assures everyone that the spirits are making themselves known. The phantom touch was one of the most common and most unsettling features of a Victorian séance. The darkness turned every sensation into something loaded with meaning. A tug on a sleeve could be a message. A tickle on the back of the hand could be the lingering presence of a loved one. And yet, when the gaslights were relit and the curtains pulled back, it often turned out to be the medium's assistant or even the medium themselves moving silently around the circle. A second touch comes, this time to your ankle. Something soft, feathery. Your first thought is a spirit's hand. Your second is the more practical image of a goose feather tied to a stick. It's not as ridiculous as it sounds. Investigators who exposed fraudulent mediums often found such tools among their props. The stick allowed the medium to reach across the circle without breaking the chain of hands, delivering an eerie sensation exactly where they wanted it. The harmonium swells, the air trembling with its breathy notes. The curtain covering the spirit cabinet rustles faintly, though no one is near it. Then you feel a distinct tug at your hair. Not gentle this time, but firm, deliberate. The darkness magnifies the feeling. Your scalp prickles, and your shoulders tense. You resist the urge to turn, knowing you would see nothing but shadows anyway. In the late 19th century, some mediums took this even further, producing entire phantom embraces in which guests swore they felt arms around them or a hand on their cheek. In many cases, the darkness and suggestion were enough to convince them. In others, it was simply the medium stepping lightly across the floor, their skirts brushing the sitters in just the right way. A whisper drifts past your ear, too faint to make out words, but close enough that you can feel the warmth of breath. This is the point in the performance when even the skeptics start to falter. The senses are overloaded. Sight is reduced to shadowy shapes. Sound is softened into a haze, and every touch feels amplified tenfold. Another brush, this time across your hand resting on the table. It's cold, clammy, almost damp. Your mind leaps to images of the dead, but your reason reminds you of the simple Victorian trick of using a piece of chilled cloth. Stored in a basin of cold water nearby, it could be slipped into a hand or draped across a neck with uncanny effect. A chair creaks to your left, the sound muffled but distinct. It could be someone shifting under the weight of anticipation. It could also be someone moving where they shouldn't be. Fraudulent séances were often structured so the medium's chair was just far enough from the table to allow subtle movement without pulling their hands entirely free. The hands of accomplices could also be substituted in darkness, one sitting in the medium's place while the medium roamed freely. The touches continue, sometimes near, sometimes far, moving around the circle in no discernible pattern. Each one is followed by a small intake of breath, or a stifled cry from someone in the group. The tension builds, the medium's hum deepens, almost vibrating through the table itself. You find yourself remembering the accounts of séances in which these phantom touches went wrong. A sitter grabbing too hard and pulling away a spirit arm that turned out to be stuffed cotton, or a feather one snapping mid-performance. The embarrassment didn't always ruin the medium's reputation. In many cases, the true believers simply refused to believe the evidence, choosing faith over fact. The harmonium drops into silence, and the room is left with only the faint sound of the clock and the uneven breathing of the sitters. the touches stop. The medium declares that the spirits are satisfied, for now. But their tone suggests more is coming. Something bolder, something physical enough to leave no doubt in the minds of those present. Your skin still tingles where the touch has landed. You're not sure if it's from the actual sensation or the power of suggestion, but either way, it's effective. You realise that in this stifling, darkened room, the line between what's real and what's staged is already blurring, and the longer you sit here, the harder it is to separate the two. The medium straightens, their face turned toward the ceiling as if listening to something only they can hear. They announce that the next phenomenon will be the most extraordinary yet. An object will move, lifted by unseen hands, and every person here, they promise, will witness it. You grip the table a little tighter, the warmth of the wood grounding you even as the candles tremble in their pools of wax. Somewhere in the darkness, something is about to float. The medium's promise hangs in the air, heavier than the candle smoke curling toward the ceiling. The guests lean forward unconsciously, their knees pressing into the table's edge, their eyes straining in the gloom. You can feel the weight of expectation settling over the circle, the way it always does before something theatrical. That strange mixture of hope and suspicion that makes you think anything might happen next. The medium lowers their head, murmuring a prayer or an invocation in a voice that seems to stretch each word into something ceremonial. The harmonium stirs again, breathing out a low, quivering chord that seems to vibrate in the wood beneath your hands. Someone to your left clears their throat nervously, the sound oddly loud in the stillness. Then the table moves. It's subtle at first, just the faintest tremor under your palms, like the shiver of a living thing. The movement grows, shifting into a gentle side-to-side sway. The medium tells everyone to keep their hands in place, to maintain the chain of energy that allows the spirits to work. Victorian table levitations were the rock stars of séance tricks, and for good reason. In the dim light, with everyone's hands resting firmly on the surface, even the smallest lift could send a room into rapturous belief. The mechanics varied, sometimes as simple as a strong leg hooked beneath the tabletop, other times employing elaborate hidden levers or spring-loaded supports. But the most common method relied on the sitters themselves, their subtle, unconscious pressure combining to create the illusion of independent motion. The sway intensifies. A leg of the table thumps softly against the floor. A gasp ripples through the group. You're aware of your own hands pressing down, but you can't tell if you're resisting or helping. It's hard to know where your muscle ends and someone else's begins in the chain of linked bodies. Then, impossibly, the table rises, just an inch at first, but unmistakable, a steady, deliberate lift. The candle flames jump in the sudden movement. The medium tilts their head back, as though channeling some great force, and the guests collectively tighten their grip. The table hovers for a heartbeat, then lowers again with a soft, almost shy bump against the floorboards. The air thickens with excitement. In the 1850s and 60s, entire parlours of respectable Victorians had been electrified by such moments. Table turning and levitation became so fashionable that even Queen Victoria reportedly observed demonstrations. Scientific circles attempted to explain the phenomenon as unconscious muscular action. But in the darkened intimacy of a séance, science felt distant and pale compared to the drama unfolding in front of you. The medium begins again, this time urging the spirits to lift the table higher. You can hear the slow scrape of wood against the floor, feel the shift in pressure as the table tilts ever so slightly. Then, with a creak that seems to echo, the table rises a second time. Higher now, enough that you feel your arms extend with it. It wobbles in the air, not the smooth, floating glide of a ghostly object, but a jerky, uneven motion that feels stubbornly human. Still in the gloom, the effect is hypnotic. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember reading about investigators who attended séances armed with chalk and flour, sprinkling the floor and table legs before the performance began. In the light, they would find telltale scuffs or smears on the shoes of the medium or their accomplices, proof of physical lifting. You imagine what such evidence might look like here. Beneath the candlelight, where every shadow is thick enough to hide a dozen guilty movements. The table thuds down again, and the medium announces that the spirits are growing playful. The harmonium brightens, shifting into a tune that is almost a march. The table begins to move in time with the rhythm, hopping slightly with each beat. The motion grows more pronounced until it is practically dancing in place. You feel your heartbeat sinking to the strange tempo, your fingers tightening reflexively on the edge of the table. One last heave, and the table tilts dramatically, one side lifting high enough to spill the candlelight across the wall in a distorted, flickering smear. Gasps turn into muffled cries. The tilt holds for several seconds before dropping with a dull, deliberate thump that rattles the silverware on a nearby sideboard. The medium lowers their arms, the music fades, and the table goes still. The silence that follows is almost heavier than the performance itself. You notice your shoulders aching, your palms damp, the faint smell of varnished wood clinging to your skin. The table is just a piece of furniture again, inert and ordinary. And yet, for a few moments, it had felt like something more. The medium takes a deep breath and announces that the spirits are not yet done. There is one more phenomenon to witness tonight, something that will allow the living and the dead to truly touch. The promise hangs there, as heavy as the heat in the parlor, and you know, in the pit of your stomach, that whatever is coming next will be even more intimate and even more unsettling than a floating table. The medium's voice drops to a near whisper, each syllable sinking into the candlelit haze as if weighed down by the gravity of what they are about to reveal. Tonight, they say, you will not only feel the presence of the dead, you will see it. The air in the parlour feels thicker than before, as if the walls have closed in an inch or two. Sweat has gathered at the base of your neck, and the fabric of your collar now feels like a noose. The candles burn low, their flames quivering in the damp air. Somewhere, the faint scent of something sweet, maybe rosewater, maybe something less pleasant, drifts in from the far corner where the spirit cabinet waits. The medium gestures toward it now. The tall, narrow structure looms in the shadows, its muslin drape hanging limp like the skin of some sleeping animal. The harmonium releases a low, sustained chord that seems to pool in the space between your ribs. A few guests shift in their chairs. One coughs quietly. The medium steps inside the cabinet and pulls the curtain closed. For a long moment, there is nothing. Just the faint creak of the floorboards as the medium adjusts their stance, the rustle of fabric as they move in the darkness. Then, from behind the muslin, a pale shape begins to take form. It starts as a blur, a smudge of whiteness against the dark. Slowly it swells into the vague outline of a human figure. Gasps echo around the table. Someone mutters a prayer under their breath. The figure's head tilts, the shape of its shoulders becoming clearer. In the low light, the effect is uncanny. Victorian séance goers called this a full-form materialization, and it was the holy grail of spirit performance. To see an actual ghost standing before you, solid enough to move and gesture, it was the sort of spectacle that could turn a skeptic into a believer in seconds. But history has been unkind to the reality of such manifestations. Investigators later found them to be almost universally fraudulent. The ghosts, nothing more than the medium, or an accomplice draped in gauze, muslin, or cheesecloth. In some cases, the material was treated with phosphorescent paint to make it glow faintly in the dark. The figure moves closer to the cabinet's opening. You can see its face now, pale, waxy, and strangely featureless, like a poorly carved mask. The eyes are dark holes. The mouth hangs slightly open. It raises an arm, the sleeve of its garment trailing in the air like mist. Someone at the table begins to cry quietly. The harmonium shifts into a slow, mournful melody. The figure sways in time, its movements oddly deliberate, almost staged. You notice that it never strays far from the cabinet's opening. This is no accident. Many fraudulent mediums use the cabinet to hide their true movements, stepping out only as far as the curtain allowed, staying close enough to retreat quickly if the light grew too bright or a sitter reached for them. Suddenly the figure turns its head toward you. The hollow gaze fixes on your side of the table. Your throat feels dry. The air smells faintly of starch and something musky, almost animal. In the stories you've read, this is often the moment when a believer swore they recognized the ghost, a departed spouse, a child, a friend. But here, under the flickering candlelight, you can't see anything familiar. The figure raises its hand. Slowly, almost theatrically, it extends toward the circle. A few guests lean forward, their own hands lifting slightly as if to meet it. You keep yours still. There's a rustle from the cabinet, the faint scrape of something wooden, and then the figure retreats, melting back into the shadow of the muslin curtain. The medium's voice emerges again, this time strained, as if they are returning from some immense effort. They step out of the cabinet, face pale, hands trembling, or pretending to. The figure is gone, swallowed back into whatever thin place it supposedly came from. You know what you've just seen was likely the product of costume, timing, and the cooperative blindness of darkness. And yet, you can understand why so many Victorians were willing to believe. The century was full of loss, cholera outbreaks, child mortality, industrial accidents. For many, seeing a familiar form in the gloom, no matter how crude, was enough to ease grief for a moment. The medium declares the manifestation a success. The spirits, they say, are pleased. But the night isn't over. There is still one last wonder to come before the séance ends. A phenomenon so intimate that it will convince even the most hardened skeptic. The candles gutter low, and the harmonium falls silent. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint metallic sound rings out sharp and clear. Something is about to be placed in your hand. The metallic sound hangs in the stale air for a moment, before fading into the background hum of candle flame and slow, shallow breathing. You shift slightly in your chair, feeling the warm press of your knees against the person opposite you. The table still smells faintly of polish and old gravy, and somewhere in the corner the muslin of the spirit cabinet stirs, though there's no breeze in the room. The medium raises their hands, palms up, and announces that the spirits wish to offer proof of their presence, something tangible, a gift, they say, brought across the veil. The Victorians called it an apport, an object that appeared seemingly out of nowhere during a séance. These could be anything: flowers, coins, feathers, small trinkets. The more sentimental, the better. A faint clink sounds again, this time nearer to your side of the table. Then something cool and hard drops into your open palm. You resist the urge to close your fingers immediately, letting it rest there for a heartbeat. It feels metallic, smooth on one side, faintly textured on the other. Around you, soft exclamations rise as others receive their own gifts. Someone whispers that they've been given a locket. Another claims to have a coin that belonged to their late father. The medium's voice swells with satisfaction, claiming that the spirits have chosen each item with care. In truth, the mechanics of the apport phenomenon were far less mystical. Mediums often hid these objects in their clothing, under the tablecloth, or within the folds of the spirit cabinet's curtain. In darkness, they could be slipped into a sitter's hand without detection. Some even kept small drawers or hidden shelves built into the underside of the séance table. The element of surprise, the cold touch of metal in a warm, expectant palm, did the rest of the work. You finally curl your fingers around your own object and lift it into the candlelight. It's a small, tarnished coin. You can just make out the worn relief of a crowned head, the date nearly rubbed smooth. It could be decades old, but certainly not from another realm. The smell of old copper lingers on your skin. The medium instructs everyone to hold their apports close, to concentrate on the connection to the spirit who delivered it. The harmonium sighs into a low, wavering chord. In the hush, you notice the faint shuffle of feet on the far side of the room, the sound of someone retreating into the shadows. By the 1870s, apports had become such a staple of the séance circuit that audiences began to expect them. Some mediums even tailored their gifts to known attendees, slipping in personal items borrowed earlier under false pretenses. This gave the illusion of intimate knowledge from beyond the grave, when in reality it was little more than sleight of hand and social intelligence. The guests murmur their thanks into the dim air, some even wiping away tears. You turn the coin over in your hand again, feeling the faint sticky residue of whatever pocket or drawer it's been hiding in all evening. It is not the treasure you expected, and certainly not proof of an afterlife, but you understand why it works. The physicality of it, the suddenness, the intimacy of having it placed directly into your palm. These things are powerful in a way that rational explanation cannot entirely deflate in the moment. The medium, sensing the height of the room's emotion, announces that the séance is reaching its climax. One final act remains, the most dangerous they claim, and the most convincing. For this, all lights must be extinguished, and no one must move or speak until instructed. The candles are snuffed one by one, the scent of hot wax curling upward as each flame dies. The harmonium falls silent. The only light now is the faintest grey smear from where the curtains fail to meet completely, a single thin ribbon of the outside world leaking into this closed, expectant space. You feel the table under your hands, solid and warm, the only anchor in a room now swallowed by darkness. The medium's voice comes from somewhere far off, or perhaps right beside you, telling you that the spirits are about to enter the circle in full. A cold gust brushes the side of your face, and something, or someone, moves between your knees and the table edge. You can't see it, but you can hear the faint swish of fabric, the suggestion of a shape moving in the blackness. Whatever is coming next will not just pass near you, it will surround you. It will make you question whether there is truly anything between the living and the dead in this parlour at all. And you know the truth is probably hiding just inches away, somewhere under the cover of that suffocating dark. The room is now a solid wall of blackness. You cannot see your own hands, even though they are splayed on the table in front of you. Your ears begin to take over, straining for the slightest sound. The hush is so absolute that even the faint hiss of the candle's extinguished wick sounds loud in your head. You can hear the slow, deliberate breathing of the person beside you, the occasional creak of chair joints settling under tense bodies. Then comes the first movement. It's not dramatic, just a soft swish of fabric somewhere beyond the circle, a faint shuffle of feet against the floorboards. It could be the wind rattling the drapes, if the windows weren't sealed behind heavy velvet. The sound moves around the perimeter of the table, stopping briefly behind certain guests. In Victorian séances, this was called the spirit walkabout, the moment when the ghost supposedly left the cabinet to move among the living. Sitters were told that the spirit might brush their shoulder, whisper in their ear, or place a token in their lap. In the dark, each touch was magnified, each sound exaggerated into something otherworldly. A faint tap comes at the back of your chair. You hold your breath. The tap comes again, this time followed by the distinct sensation of fingers, cool and oddly stiff, grazing the top of your shoulder. Across the table, someone gasps. It's easy to imagine the scene in the mind's eye. A luminous figure gliding silently between chairs, bending low to bestow a blessing or deliver a message. But what you actually feel is far less graceful. The touch lingers just a fraction too long, and the stiffness of it suggests not bone and flesh, but perhaps stuffed muslin or carved wood. Many mediums used prop hands for these moments, light enough to manipulate easily, cold enough to mimic the chill of the grave. The sound moves again, circling behind the person on your right. They make a small choking sound, as though fighting back tears or laughter. The medium's voice floats in from somewhere, urging the spirits to pass freely, to visit each sitter in turn. Victorian séances were rife with such theatrics. In the late 19th century, the most elaborate performances had multiple assistants in the dark, moving silently with practiced steps. They used the cover of the darkness and the sitters' linked hands to their advantage, gliding between chairs and brushing faces with veils or scarves dipped in cool water. The sitters, primed for contact, would report the most elaborate sensations: a gentle caress, a tug at the sleeve, even the press of lips to a cheek. Something passes close to your ear now, so close you can feel the faintest displacement of air. You hear a whisper, too quiet to make out the words, but close enough that it raises gooseflesh along your arms. In the pitch black, without the ability to see the source, your brain accepts the explanation it's given. This is a voice from beyond. The footsteps, if they are footsteps, grow bolder. A chair is nudged. A hand brushes the back of your neck. The faint scent of rosewater lingers in the air as if a figure in perfume has just passed. You think of the stories of sitters recognizing a departed loved one by their scent alone. You also think about how easy it would be to apply a dab of scent to a handkerchief before the performance. Then comes the most dramatic moment yet. Something drops heavily onto the table right in front of you. The sound is dull and solid, like a book or a block of wood. Hands around the table flinch, and you feel the vibrations travel through the wood beneath your fingers. The medium declares that the spirits have brought a sign, a physical manifestation of their power. Of course, in the dark you can't see what it is, and that's precisely the point. Many mediums avoided showing such gifts until after the séance, when emotions were high and skepticism had been dulled by the atmosphere. The presence, real or imagined, continues to move around the circle. Each guest gets their turn. A touch, a whisper, a brush of cool fabric. The room seems to contract and expand with the movement, and the line between performance and supernatural experience grows harder to define. Finally, the medium calls the spirit back to the cabinet. There's a faint rush of movement, a rustle of fabric, and then silence. The harmonium breathes out one last note, long and low, before falling still. The darkness lingers for a moment longer before the medium instructs someone to light the candles. The match flares, its sulphur bite cutting through the perfume and candle smoke. One by one, the flames return, revealing the familiar cramped parlor, the table, the chairs, the heavy drapes, and not a single ghost in sight. But the sensation of that cold, stiff hand on your shoulder refuses to fade, and the night the medium insists still has one final wonder left to share, something no one in this room will ever forget. The candles flicker in their holders, their flames bending under currents of heat that shouldn't exist in a room with no open windows. The air feels heavy in your lungs, and you notice the faintest hum from the harmonium. Not loud enough to be music, just a whisper of air through tired reeds. The medium has not moved from their seat at the head of the table, yet their presence seems to swell, pulling every gaze in the room toward them. They declare that the spirits will now give one last display, a sign so undeniable, so overwhelming, that it will confirm for all present that the dead are among the living. The grand finale. The air tightens, the circle of linked hands grows rigid. The medium's voice dips into a deep, slow rhythm, each word stretching like a rope pulled taut. Around the table, heads bow, eyes close. The harmonium swells just slightly, enough to fill the silence without overwhelming it. Then the darkness comes again, the candles snuffed one by one, their brief sputters of light vanishing into the thick velvet black. The first sound is a sharp rap on the table, then another, then a scatter of taps running the length of the wood like a drum roll. The table shudders beneath your hands. A chair leg scrapes across the floor. The harmonium bursts into a strange, discordant chord. Then the chaos begins. A gust of cold air brushes your ankles. A bell rings somewhere in the corner. A tambourine clatters to life in the darkness, its metallic rattle bouncing from one side of the room to the other. You hear a whisper near your ear, then a laugh, high, breathy, and gone as soon as it arrives. The table jerks sharply to one side, knocking knees against its edge. Something soft brushes your face, leaving the faint scent of rosewater in its wake. Victorian séance finales were notorious for their sensory overload. Every trick that had been teased during the evening was deployed at once. Floating objects, mysterious voices, phantom touches, even sudden apports dropped into laps. The aim was to overwhelm the senses until the sitter could no longer separate one sensation from another. It was theatre in total darkness, performed with props, accomplices, and perfect timing. The table lifts now, not just an inch, but enough that your elbows rise with it. It wobbles in the air, bumps down, then rises again, this time tilting dangerously. You tighten your grip on the hands beside you. Across the circle, someone gasps and the sound is swallowed immediately by the cacophony. The tambourine shaking, the harmonium's frantic chords, the faint shuffle of feet when no one should be standing. In the gloom, something lands in your lap. It's small, cool, and faintly damp. Your fingers close around it instinctively. The medium's voice booms over the noise, declaring it a gift from the other side. You know better. Yet the timing of it, the way it seems to appear out of nowhere in the midst of the uproar, sends a shiver down your spine. The finale grows wilder. A trumpet floats briefly above the table, its wide mouth sweeping from guest to guest, as if the spirit is peering inside each one. A hand brushes the back of your neck. The table jerks again, nearly toppling a candle you can't even see. Somewhere to your left, a chair tips back and lands with a thud. By the late Victorian era, such spectacles are drawn as much criticism as admiration. Skeptics like magician John Neville Maskelyne and escapologist Harry Houdini replicated the chaos of these finales in full light, showing that everything could be explained by hidden wires, props, and quick hands. But the dark, the closeness, and the suggestibility of the audience kept the tradition alive. The performance builds to a peak, the harmonium shrieking, the table knocking against the floor in a rhythmic beat, the air full of moving shapes you cannot see but can feel in every nerve. The medium's voice cuts through it all, summoning the spirits one final time before commanding them to depart. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stops. The tambourine falls silent. The harmonium's last chord hangs in the air and fades. The table is still. The darkness is complete and unmoving. A single match flares, the sulphur sting biting into the heavy air. One candle is lit, then another, until the parlour is once again bathed in weak, flickering light. The medium sits motionless, their eyes closed, face drawn with what looks like exhaustion. The cabinet's curtain hangs limp and still. Around the table, guests look dazed, blinking against the return of light. You glance down at the object in your lap. It's a pressed flower, limp from the damp, its petals bruised. You know it was likely hidden in someone's pocket all along, waiting for the right dramatic moment to be dropped. And yet, in the afterglow of the spectacle, it almost feels like proof of something. Almost. The medium opens their eyes slowly, scanning the table with a look of solemn satisfaction. They declare the séance closed, the spirits dismissed. Chairs scrape back from the table, skirts swish, boots scuff the floor. The smell of wax and perfume thickens as the heat of the moment gives way to the cooler air seeping in from the hallway. You rise with the others, your legs stiff from sitting. The parlour looks ordinary again, cramped, dusty, cluttered with the same mismatched chairs and heavy drapes. And yet, it feels changed, as if the performance has left a residue in the air. A faint impression that lingers even after the last prop has been put away. The guests file out, some clutching their gifts, others already whispering about the next sitting. You step into the night, the cool air a shock against your overheated skin. The street is empty, the gas lamps casting weak halos on the wet pavement. Behind you, the townhouse door closes with a soft click, sealing in whatever truths and tricks the evening contained. And you know you will smell candle smoke on your coat for days. The chill of the night air should have wiped the séance from your senses, but it clings stubbornly. The smell of candle smoke in your coat, the faint waxy taste of tallow lingering on your tongue, the phantom feel of that stiff, cold spirit hand on your shoulder. You think the evening is over, that you'll return to your lodgings and sleep off the mixture of heat, incense and suggestion. But in true Victorian fashion, the experience is not finished yet. The hostess, standing in the doorway with a polite smile that feels as rehearsed as any part of the séance, invites you to return the following morning. The spirits, she says, will be honoured at a special gathering, a spirit breakfast. You've never heard of such a thing, but others in the group nod knowingly, as if this is an expected part of the ritual. You suspect it's also a way of keeping the guests, and their wallets, close. When you arrive the next day, the parlour has been transformed. The heavy drapes are drawn open, allowing pale daylight to spill across the same mismatched chairs and battered table. The room smells of weak tea, butter, and something slightly sour underneath. Perhaps the ghost of last night's candle smoke clinging to the upholstery. The spirit cabinet is gone, replaced by a sideboard covered in plates of bread, jam, and hard-boiled eggs. The harmonium sits silent in the corner, its bellows deflated, its keys looking suddenly ordinary without the flicker of candlelight to animate them. Guests from the previous night gather in small knots, speaking in hushed tones, passing around their séance gifts as though they are relics. Coins are rubbed between fingers, pressed flowers admired, feathers stroked. Every so often someone glances at the medium, seated at the head of the table, sipping tea from a china cup, as if they have not just spent the previous evening channeling the dead. Victorian spiritualists understood the importance of prolonging the afterglow of a performance. Morning gatherings like this were perfect opportunities to reinforce the experience, answer questions, and, most importantly, sell keepsakes. On one side of the room, a small table is set up with cabinet photographs of the medium, pamphlets of spirit communications, and even signed copies of last night's séance photograph, still damp from the developer's bath. The image is predictably cloudy and indistinct, but in the haze you can just about make out a pale form hovering near the table. A double exposure most likely, but one that will fetch a decent price from someone still riding the high of the experience. The medium begins to speak, their voice softer now, almost intimate. They address each guest in turn, recalling details from the night before with uncanny accuracy. You realise that much of this is memory. Small details observed in the flicker of the candles, half-heard whispers between sitters, now repackaged as supernatural insight. It's an old trick in the world of performance. Feed back to the audience what they've already given you, dressed in the mystery of revelation. You sip your tea, its weak bitterness grounding you in the ordinariness of the moment. But the others seem spellbound, leaning forward as the medium describes the spiritual resonance of their apport gifts. A woman clutching a pressed violet nod vigorously as she's told it represents love from beyond. A man with a tarnished locket blinks rapidly when the medium says it carries the essence of a protective spirit. On the table, plates of bread and jam disappear quickly. The butter is pale and slightly gritty with salt. A platter of hard-boiled eggs releases the faint sulphur smell of overcooking, mingling awkwardly with the scent of tea leaves and polish. You chew slowly, watching as the room's energy shifts from the reverent awe of last night to something more transactional. The medium produces a small wooden box and opens it to reveal a collection of spirit stones, smooth river pebbles marked with chalk symbols. They explain that these have been charged with energy from the séance and can be purchased for ongoing protection. The price is modest enough to encourage impulse buying, and coins clink steadily into the box beside them. By the 1880s, such practices were well established in the spiritualist circuit. The séance itself was the show, but the morning after was the merchandise table. Everything from photographs to charms to bound volumes of spirit messages could be sold to guests still soft from the night's emotional manipulations. Even refreshments had their role. Breaking bread together reinforced a sense of community, of shared experience, making it less likely that anyone would question the more implausible moments of the previous evening. You finish your tea and decline the offer of another egg. The medium rises, moving from group to group with an ease that is almost political. Their presence is magnetic, their smile warm, their tone just the right balance of mystical and personable. You can see how people come back again and again, not just for the spectacle, but for this quiet intimacy the morning after. As the gathering winds down, the medium makes one final announcement. Another séance will be held the following week, this one promising even greater manifestations. Guests are urged to reserve their seats immediately, as the spirits have apparently been clamouring for more contact. A small ledger is produced, and several people step forward without hesitation to add their names and their deposits. You step out into the pale daylight, the smell of tea and polish still clinging to your clothes. The street feels quieter than it should, as if the séance has followed you out here, trailing behind in the space between one breath and the next. And you know that somewhere, behind that townhouse door, the parlour is already being rearranged for the next performance. The props polished, the cabinet reset, the harmonium ready to wheeze out its ghostly notes once more. Because in the world of Victorian spiritualism, the dead were never entirely at rest, not when there was another sitting to fill. You think leaving the spirit breakfast will be the last you hear of the séance, but Victorian mediums knew their business well. They understood that last night's spectacle and this morning's tea were just the first steps in keeping a paying customer firmly in orbit. The real work, and the real profit, came in what happened between séances. It begins innocently enough. A day or two later, a neatly folded letter arrives at your lodgings. The handwriting is elegant, the ink a deep black that still shines faintly in the right light. The seal is plain, but the return address matches the townhouse where the séance took place. You break it open to find a message written on heavy cream paper that smells faintly of lavender and candle smoke. The letter thanks you for attending, of course, but quickly moves into more personal territory. The medium writes that the spirit spoke to them after the séance, conveying a message meant only for you. There are hints, vague but intriguing, about a presence that lingered near you throughout the sitting, a spirit eager to speak further. You're encouraged to write back with any thoughts or questions, and perhaps to schedule a private session so this contact can be deepened. This was the heart of Victorian spirit correspondence, a calculated way to maintain emotional engagement between séances. The letters were rarely specific enough to be easily disproved, but always pointed enough to stir curiosity. They often included gentle reminders about upcoming sittings, or recommendations to bring a particular item belonging to the deceased for energy attunement. In your case, the letter suggests you bring a small personal object to the next gathering. The medium explains that spirits are more likely to manifest fully when they have a physical anchor from their earthly life. You're also advised to keep the coin you received during the séance close at hand, preferably under your pillow, to strengthen the connection. It's just plausible enough to consider, and just strange enough to make you feel slightly self-conscious as you tuck the tarnished metal under your bedclothes that night. Within days, another letter arrives, this time accompanied by a small pressed flower wrapped in paper. The note claims it was found on the séance table after you left, and that the spirits intended it for you. Whether it truly appeared in the room or came from the florist down the street is impossible to say, but its arrival is timed perfectly to keep the memory of the séance alive. The strategy was common among Victorian mediums. Building a loyal patron base meant offering more than just a seat at the table. It meant creating an ongoing relationship with the dead, one that required the medium as the indispensable go-between. Some clients would correspond for months, even years, exchanging letters that claimed to contain spirit advice on everything from love to investments. Your next letter is longer, detailing how the medium has been feeling disturbances in their parlour since your visit. The spirits, they write, have been calling your name. They urge you to attend the next séance, warning that delaying might allow the connection to weaken. It's flattery wrapped in urgency, and you can imagine how many Victorians, in a century marked by grief and uncertainty, would have found such appeals irresistible. By now you've noticed the letters also serve as advertisements. The upcoming séance promises new manifestations, and a special appearance by a spirit long known to our circle. Tickets are limited, of course, and those with ongoing correspondence are given priority. It's a clever inversion of demand. You aren't paying for a service, you're being granted the opportunity to participate. The tone of the correspondence remains carefully balanced. There's warmth and familiarity, as though the medium remembers you personally from among dozens of sitters. There's also the constant hint of exclusivity, that you're being trusted with something others are not. This was how the most successful Victorian mediums built their followings. Each letter was a thread, weaving the sitter deeper into the fabric of the performance, binding them to the medium's table week after week. For the client, the séance became more than an evening's entertainment. It became an ongoing story in which they were personally invested. You set the latest letter aside, the paper now creased from rereading. The coin still rests under your pillow. The pressed flower, though starting to crumble, lies carefully between the pages of a book on your nightstand. You tell yourself you haven't decided whether to attend again. But when the next envelope arrives, its wax seal warm from the postman's pocket, its message written in that same elegant hand, you know you'll open it immediately. And you know, even before you unfold the paper, that the spirits will have something to say. The next letter arrives with an extra flourish. The handwriting is the same elegant script, the ink just as black and heavy, but the tone is different, more urgent, more personal. The medium writes that the spirits who reach for you during the séance have grown restless. They have, the letter says, messages they cannot deliver in a crowded room. The only solution is a private sitting. You know enough now to suspect the real reason. Public séances might fill the room with believers and generate ticket sales, but private sittings were where the real profit lay. There, with no audience to share the spectacle, the medium could tailor every moment to you alone. Every word could be bent toward your personal history, every prop chosen for its ability to press a very specific emotional button. You agree to the appointment, partly out of curiosity, partly out of the strange pull that the séance has left in your mind. The medium's house looks different in the daylight. The curtains are drawn against the sun, but light still leaks around their edges, catching on the dust motes that float in the air. The parlour smells faintly of polish and lavender water, undercut by the faint musk of wool that's been shut away too long. The spirit cabinet is gone. In its place is a smaller, closer arrangement. Just 2 chairs pulled up to a low table covered in a dark cloth. A single candle sits in the middle, its flame steady and bright against the gloom. The harmonium rests silent in the corner. Without the bustle of a full room, the space feels quieter, heavier, almost conspiratorial. The medium begins without preamble, closing their eyes and placing their hands flat on the table. Their voice is softer now, pitched to draw you in. They speak of the coin you received during the séance, of the flower pressed between the pages of your book, of the energy these items carry. They talk about the spirit who has been trying to reach you, a figure described in just enough detail to make you search your own memory for a match. This is where the private sitting becomes dangerous. Without the distraction of other guests, every word seems aimed directly at you. You're no longer part of an audience. You are the sole focus of the performance. It's the difference between sitting in a theatre and being alone on a stage with the lead actor. The tricks here are subtler. There are no floating tables, no flying tambourines. Instead, the phenomena are intimate. A faint rap on the table that seems to respond to your questions. A cold draft that brushes your face when you speak a certain name. A small object, a pebble, a ribbon, a dried leaf that appears on the table while your eyes are fixed on the candle. Each is delivered with perfect timing, calibrated to the rhythm of your reactions. Victorian investigators who attended such sittings often found the mechanics laughably simple. Hidden compartments in the table, small props palmed until the right moment, a servant moving silently outside the door to create the sound of knocks or whispers. But in the closeness of the room, with the candlelight throwing everything into deep shadow, those simple tricks could feel monumental. The medium asks if you would like to speak directly to the spirit. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. They lower their head, muttering in a voice that gradually shifts. Deeper now, slower, more deliberate. When they raise their eyes, they do not look at you directly, but over your shoulder, as if following something unseen. They answer questions in short, deliberate phrases, pausing just long enough for you to fill in the gaps. This is the core of the cold reading technique. The medium offers fragments, and you supply the meaning. They nod gravely, reinforcing whatever connection you think you've made, building the illusion that they know far more than they possibly could. You realise somewhere between the second and third message that you've been leaning forward without thinking, your elbows on the table, your hands curled toward the candlelight. You feel the pull of the performance, the intimacy of the space, the quiet rhythm of the medium's voice, and you can see how easy it would be for someone in grief to forget their doubts entirely. The sitting lasts perhaps 40 minutes, though it feels both shorter and longer. The medium ends by placing a small, folded piece of paper in your hand. Inside is a few lines of writing, signed with the name of the spirit you were meant to have spoken to. You recognise the handwriting. It's the same as the medium's own, but you tuck the paper into your pocket all the same. When you leave, the daylight feels strange on your skin, as if you've been underwater and have only just surfaced. You notice the price of the sitting was twice that of the public séance, and that it's already been suggested you book another before the connection fades. And you can't help but think that the private sitting is the true engine of the Victorian séance, not the theatrical chaos of the group performance, but the quiet, precise manipulation of a one-on-one encounter. Because in that silence, with the light low and your attention fixed, you aren't just a guest anymore, you're a client. And clients return. The private sitting leaves you with a strange aftertaste. Not exactly belief, not exactly disbelief, but the lingering sense that you've been drawn into something larger than a single night's performance. The next letter from the medium arrives before the week is out, and it contains not just an invitation to the next séance, but something unexpected. A recommendation to attend another circle, this one several towns away, led by a renowned medium, whose gifts are said to surpass even theirs. At first it sounds like a passing suggestion, but you quickly learn this was part of an entire Victorian subculture, séance tourism. In the same way modern travellers might chase the best beaches or food festivals, Victorians with money and an appetite for the supernatural arranged their travel around visiting famed mediums. By the 1870s, certain towns had built reputations as spiritualist hubs. In England, seaside resorts like Brighton and Blackpool advertised not just salt air and promenades, but access to gifted sensitives who could summon departed loved ones between afternoon tea and an evening concert. Spa towns such as Cheltenham added séances to their menu of mineral baths and genteel entertainments, promising visitors a full mind and body restoration, or at least a pleasant distraction from the damp climate and industrial smoke of the cities. The letter urges you to travel to one such hub, a coastal town known for its summer season of spirit communication. Accommodations, it notes, can be arranged at a boarding house owned by a family sympathetic to the work of the spirit. This is no coincidence. Many mediums had quiet business arrangements with local innkeepers, ensuring their clients would be lodged somewhere that kept the conversation and the mystique alive even outside the séance room. When you arrive, you find the promenade bustling with women in layered skirts and men in tailored frock coats, strolling past signs advertising direct voice demonstrations, materialization circles, and trance lectures. The smell of sea salt mixes with frying fish, and the ever-present tang of coal smoke from the excursion trains bringing in visitors. Shop windows display books on spiritualism alongside stereoscopic cards showing blurred, ghostly figures, staged, of course, but compelling in their novelty. You attend the recommended séance and find that the format is almost identical to the one back home. The darkened room, the heavy drapes, the table tilting under unseen force. But the performance is grander here, the tricks more elaborate. The medium levitates a musical box, sending tinny notes tumbling through the darkness, while a spirit draped in luminous fabric glides between sitters. You recognise the mechanics, but the sheer scale of it impresses you. Victorian séance tourism relied on this sense of scale. Mediums in popular destinations competed for attention, each trying to outdo the others with more dramatic manifestations. For visitors, it became less about proof of the afterlife and more about chasing the most spectacular show. A ghostly arms race where the currency was astonishment. Between sittings, you wander the town and see how deeply the trade runs. Tea rooms advertise spirit readings alongside their scones. Stationers sell embossed séance invitations by the dozen. Even the pier hawkers have joined in, offering shells charged with psychic energy for a few pence. It's clear that spiritualism here isn't just a belief system, it's an economy. You meet others on the same circuit, regulars who swap recommendations the way seasoned travellers might compare inns or stagecoach routes. They speak of mediums in other towns, of circles that must be joined before the year is out, of a spirit trumpet demonstration in Manchester that drew a crowd so large it had to be moved to a public hall. You realise this is more than just a passing craze. For many, séance tourism has become a lifestyle, a way to move through the world in search of ever more theatrical contact with the dead. Now, by the end of your visit, you've spent more than you intended, on tickets, on small spirit gifts, on photographs where a faint blur stands over your shoulder. You board the train home with your pockets lighter and your mind full of flickering images, pale shapes in darkened rooms, the sound of whispered voices, the hum of anticipation in spaces where nothing can be seen but everything feels possible. And you suspect that the mediums count on this, on the way the memories soften in the retelling, the way the strangeness of it all becomes a story you want to share, perhaps even to relive. Because in the world of Victorian séance tourism, the journey itself was the performance, and the return ticket was always the first step toward planning the next trip. You return from the seaside town thinking you've seen the peak of Victorian séance culture, the grandeur, the spectacle, the polished routines perfected for tourists. But the next letter from your regular medium proves otherwise. This one doesn't invite you to another sitting. It warns you. The letter is heavy with indignation. Another medium, unnamed but clearly known to both of you, has been spreading falsehoods about your host's abilities. They claim your medium uses trickery, that the spirits summoned in their parlour are nothing but costumed accomplices and parlour games. Your medium naturally denies every word, insisting that jealousy is the only explanation. And yet, in the careful way the letter describes these accusations, you begin to realise something. Victorian spiritualism wasn't just about summoning the dead, it was also about outshining the living. Medium rivalries were as much a part of the scene as trumpets and table raps. By the 1880s, spiritualism had grown crowded. There were only so many clients with money to spend and only so many evenings in the week to hold sittings. Accusations flew freely. Fraud, theft, spirit impersonation, where a medium claimed another medium's regular ghost, even outright plagiarism of séance routines. In a field that thrived on mystery, nothing delighted audiences more than a good scandal. Your medium invites you to a truth circle, a special sitting where they will prove their authenticity in response to these slanders. When you arrive, the atmosphere is charged in a way the usual séance is not. The air smells faintly of furniture polish and lamp oil, but underneath there's something sharper, the metallic tang of tension. Guests are seated close, not in the usual solemn arrangement, but in a tighter, more confrontational circle. The medium's eyes flash in the candlelight as they declare that the spirits themselves will vindicate them. What follows is, by séance standards, unusually bold. Instead of the slow build of raps, whispers and floating objects, the performance starts with a full materialization from the cabinet, gauzy and glowing, the figure emerging so close to a sitter's lap that it draws startled laughter. The table levitates almost immediately, swaying violently from side to side. The harmonium blares a triumphant march instead of its usual mournful drones. The entire sitting feels like a pointed display, a raised eyebrow aimed squarely at the rival who dared question their skill. Victorian newspapers often published these feuds like serialized dramas. One week, a medium would accuse another of using a hidden accomplice to ring bells in the dark. The next, the accused would invite a reporter to their own séance to prove the charge false. It was competitive theatre disguised as spiritual warfare, and the public loved every twist. After the truth circle, your medium lingers to speak privately with select guests. They mention, almost casually, that the rival medium's manifestations are uncannily similar to their own, a veiled suggestion of theft. They urge you, as a trusted client, not to be drawn in by imitation. It's a masterstroke of subtle marketing, the kind that makes you feel both loyal and wary at the same time. Rivalries could become downright petty. Mediums sometimes claim to have stolen one another's spirit guides, announcing in sittings that a ghost had chosen to abandon its former host for a worthier vessel. Others mocked rivals in coded messages during séances, delivering jabs from the mouths of the dead that the living were quick to decode. On occasion, these feuds escalated into public challenges, live séances attended by investigators and rival mediums, each hoping to catch the other in a slip. The tension didn't just sell tickets, it gave spiritualism the same allure as a stage play with an unpredictable script. Clients weren't just attending séances for proof of life after death. They were attending to see what the living would do next, whose name would be dropped in the shadows, and which accusations might fly across the candlelit table. You leave the truth circle feeling oddly energized, the way one might after watching two actors play out a well-rehearsed scene in perfect opposition. Whatever the spirits did or didn't do tonight, you've witnessed another truth of the Victorian séance. Half the draw was the ghosts, but the other half was the drama between the people pretending to summon them. And in this world, grudges could linger longer than any spirit. Rivalries between mediums could simmer for months. But in the Victorian séance world, the ultimate weapon wasn't gossip. It was an exposé. Public unmaskings were part scandal, part entertainment, and when done right, they drew as many headlines as any high society wedding or political scandal. And like all good theatre, they needed an audience. The invitation arrives unexpectedly, not from your regular medium, but from a circle of concerned gentlemen who claim to be investigating spiritualist fraud. The letter promises a demonstration in which the truth of certain manifestations will be revealed beyond doubt. The location is familiar, a hired hall just a few streets away from the townhouse, where you've attended so many sittings. When you arrive, the hall feels different from a normal séance. The chairs are arranged not in an intimate circle, but in long rows, facing a raised platform. There's no low candlelight here. The room is bright, lit by gas lamps hissing softly along the walls. The crowd is a mixture of skeptics, curious onlookers, and loyalists who've come to defend their favoured mediums. The air smells faintly of damp wool and pipe tobacco, tinged with the sharper odour of coal gas. On stage sits a table, a spirit cabinet, and a collection of familiar props. A trumpet, a tambourine, a bell, lengths of gauzy fabric. A man in a black frock coat steps forward to announce the evening's proceedings. They will, he says, replicate the most famous manifestations of the accused mediums in full light, using nothing more than human skill and the apparatus before you. The first demonstration is table levitation. Without preamble, an assistant hooks their leg under the table's crossbar and, with a subtle lift, sends it wobbling into the air. In the bright gaslight, you can see every movement, every twitch of muscle, the angle of the foot. It's crude compared to the eerie glide of a candlelit séance, but effective in showing how the trick works. Next comes the spirit trumpet. The assistant tucks the narrow end under their chin, speaks softly into it, and lets the sound echo from the flared mouth. In the darkness of a séance, with the trumpet painted black and the lights low, the voice would seem to float anywhere in the room. Here, in the glare, it's clear as day that the sound never left the speaker's lips. The bell is rung not by unseen hands, but by a wire run through a hole in the table, manipulated from below. The tambourine is made to rattle with a thread so fine it would vanish in candlelight. The ectoplasm, the supposed material of the spirit world, is produced from the mouth in a damp, limp mass of muslin, folded tight and hidden in the cheek until the right moment. The audience reacts in waves. Some laugh openly, others shake their heads. A few shift uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps remembering moments from past séances that now feel different under this bright light. The most devoted believers mutter about trickery on the part of the investigators, convinced that imitation does not disprove the real thing. By the late 19th century, exposés like this were becoming common. Magicians such as John Neville Maskelyne and Harry Keller built entire acts around debunking spiritualist phenomena, drawing large crowds eager to see the mysteries stripped bare. Even Houdini, decades later, would dedicate himself to exposing mediums, attending séances in disguise before publicly revealing the mechanics of their tricks. But these events didn't always destroy the careers of the accused. In some cases, the publicity only fueled curiosity. A medium exposed in one city might simply move to another, rebrand themselves, and continue as before. For every client lost to skepticism, another might attend out of sheer fascination, to see if the performance could fool them even after they knew the method. The demonstration ends with a full materialization. An assistant steps into the cabinet, pulls the curtain closed, and emerges draped in glowing cheesecloth, their face hidden behind a wax mask. In the light, it's laughable. The seams of the mask are visible. The fabric clings awkwardly to their clothes. But you can imagine how different it would look in near total darkness, the figure swaying just beyond arm's reach. As the crowd disperses, you hear debates breaking out in the aisles. Some swear they've been vindicated in their skepticism. Others insist that real manifestations cannot be reproduced so easily. A few joke that they'd still pay to see it done in proper darkness, with the thrill of the unknown intact. Walking home, you realise that the exposé hasn't just shown you how the tricks work, it's shown you why they worked in the first place. Not because the mechanics were flawless, but because the environment was perfect. Darkness, silence, the collective focus of a room full of people wanting to believe, those were the true tools of the Victorian séance. And no matter how many times the curtain was pulled back, there would always be another audience willing to sit in the dark and wait for the knock, the whisper, the touch on the shoulder that might mean the dead had returned. The public exposés made headlines, but they were blunt instruments, flashy, theatrical, and designed to humiliate. The real threat to Victorian mediums came from a quieter, more persistent enemy, the scientific investigator. These were not hecklers or rival performers. They were men, and occasionally women, with letters after their names, affiliated with learned societies, universities, and professional associations. They approached the séance not as entertainment, but as an experiment, and that meant controlling the conditions. You hear about such an investigation through the grapevine, or more accurately, through a pointed remark in your medium's next letter. They claim to have been invited, their word, to participate in a study by a committee from the Society for Psychical Research. The Society, founded in 1882, was one of the first formal organisations devoted to the scientific examination of supernatural claims. Its members included physicists, philosophers and physicians, all eager to test spiritualism under what they called strict controls. When you attend, the setting is unlike any séance you've experienced. Instead of a cramped curtained parlour, the gathering takes place in a meeting room with walls bare of heavy drapes. Gas lamps burn steadily, keeping the space bright enough to see every guest's expression. The long table is plain wood, unadorned by cloth, and the chairs are placed with exact symmetry. The air smells faintly of chalk dust and coal gas, the odour of institutions rather than private parlours. The investigators have made changes to the procedure. The medium's chair is fixed to the floor. Their hands and feet will be held or observed at all times by committee members. Every object, trumpet, bell, tambourine, has been examined beforehand, measured, and even marked in discreet ways so tampering will be obvious. Flour is sprinkled lightly on the floor around the table legs to reveal any movement. The medium accepts all this with outward calm, though you notice the stiffness in their posture, the quick dart of the eyes toward the cabinet that will not be used tonight. They begin the sitting, their voice still low and solemn, but the conditions work against them. The bright light removes the shadows that normally conceal sleight of hand. The constant touch of the observer's hands eliminates the opportunity for subtle reaches or tugs. Minutes pass with no phenomena. The investigators wait patiently, scribbling notes in quiet, deliberate strokes. At last, there's a faint sound. A single rap on the table. It's weak, almost apologetic. Another follows, but in the harsh light, you can see the muscle twitch in the medium's arm as it happens. One of the observers politely asks them to relax their hand, and the knocking stops entirely. Some mediums, confronted with such controls, simply refuse to continue. Others tried to adapt, claiming that the spirits disliked unfriendly conditions or were too shy to manifest under scrutiny. It was an explanation that played well to devoted followers, who could then blame the investigators for scaring away the dead. The committee here is patient but thorough. They test the table for hidden mechanisms. None are found. They inspect the medium's garments for concealed props. Nothing but a faint smell of lavender water and candle smoke clinging to the fabric. After 2 hours, they thank the medium and end the sitting. The notes are collected, the objects returned to their boxes, the flour swept into a tidy pile. Later, the report will conclude that no evidence of supernatural phenomena was observed under the controlled conditions. It will be published in the Society's journal, adding one more brick to the slow wall of skepticism being built around the spiritualist movement. And yet, this won't be the end for your medium. They will return to their own parlor, to their own circle of loyal clients, where the lights are low, the table is heavy with cloth, and the hands clasped in the darkness will never belong to skeptical investigators with notebooks. Because in the Victorian séance world, science could strip away the shadows, but it could never strip away the desire for what those shadows seem to hold. By the 1890s, the grand, candlelit Victorian séance was starting to lose its iron grip on public imagination. The scandals, the exposés, and the slow but steady encroachment of scientific scrutiny had chipped away at its veneer. The biggest names in the movement could still pack parlours and even small theatres, but the glamour was fading. Your medium doesn't say this outright in their letters, but you can feel it between the lines. The invitations are less formal now, the handwriting a little hurried, the promises a little more extravagant. The grand finales are still there, the floating trumpets, the ghostly forms, but the guest lists are shorter, and the rooms feel emptier than they once did. One evening you arrive to find that the séance has been moved from the main parlour to a smaller upstairs sitting room. The furniture is mismatched, the wallpaper faded and curling in the corners. The heavy drapes are still drawn, but they do little to hide the fact that the space is cramped and overly warm. The table, once a grand piece of dark oak, is now a lighter, less imposing thing. Easier to move, perhaps, but lacking the gravity of its predecessor. The sitters are different too. Instead of a full mix of curious newcomers, wealthy thrill-seekers, and grieving families, the group is mostly made up of familiar faces, the regulars. They greet each other warmly, swapping stories of previous sittings as if recalling chapters in a shared novel. There's comfort in that familiarity, but also a hint of insularity, as though the séance is now more social club than public spectacle. The manifestations are smaller, subtler. Instead of a full materialization, there's a pale scrap of gauze emerging briefly from the cabinet before being withdrawn. The table knocks once or twice, enough to elicit polite murmurs but not the gasps of years past. The trumpet produces a whisper, but it is faint, hesitant, as if the spirits themselves have grown weary of the routine. Victorian spiritualism was always a performance, but in its heyday, it had been performed with a kind of reckless confidence, the belief that the audience would never grow tired of the show. Now, with the press running more sceptical stories than sensational ones, mediums had to work harder to hold attention. The smaller circles leaned into intimacy. The message was no longer, "Come and see the dead walk among us," but "Come and speak privately with those you've lost." Your medium adapts to the new climate with a kind of weary ingenuity. The sittings are framed less as spectacles and more as private consultations. The language shifts from theatrical promise to personal reassurance. The phenomena shrink in scale but grow in sentiment. A knock in answer to a question, a sudden scent of flowers, a faint touch on the hand. The regulars are happy with this. They are not here to be dazzled anymore. They are here to maintain the connection, to keep alive the ritual that has become a part of their lives. Many of them have been coming for years, and the séance has become less about proof of the afterlife than about the comfort of the familiar. You realise that what you're seeing is a kind of slow retreat, the séance pulling back from the public stage into the private parlour where it began decades earlier. The grand Victorian version may be fading, but in these smaller, quieter rooms it is still very much alive. The lights are still dim, the hands still clasped, the knock still timed to elicit that brief, electric shiver. And as you leave that night, stepping out into the cool air, you understand something important. This is how the séance will survive, not in the bright gaslit halls, not under the eyes of scientific committees, but here, in these little rooms where a handful of people gather to chase the same flicker of hope they've been chasing for years. Because as long as someone is willing to sit in the dark and wait for a knock that might mean nothing, but might mean everything, the séance will never truly die. By the turn of the century, the séance was no longer the glittering social event it had been in the height of the Victorian era. The scandalous exposés, the growing scepticism in the press, and the quiet attrition of time had dulled its novelty. But instead of disappearing entirely, the séance mutated, sliding into the early 20th century wearing a different face. Your medium, like so many of their peers, began leaning heavily into the language of psychical research, rather than parlour spectacle. The word séance itself was used less, replaced by phrases like experimental circle or trance communication. Curtains were still drawn, candles still gutted in brass holders, but the talk between sitters now mixed spiritual claims with pseudo-scientific jargon. Vibrations, psychic energy, etheric fields. You notice the performance is shorter now. No more hours-long stretches of dramatic build-up. Instead, it's a tidy half-hour arrangement of knocks, whispers, and a single appearance of that now well-worn gauze ectoplasm. The rest of the time is devoted to talking, the medium interpreting messages from the spirits in a calm, measured tone, almost like a doctor giving results. The audience has shifted too. The fashionable elite, the curious tourists, and the wealthy thrill-seekers have moved on to other amusements, the theatre, the cinema, the gramophone. In their place are smaller, quieter groups, widows clutching lockets, aging parents with photographs wrapped in tissue, the occasional society member taking notes for the record. By the Edwardian years, the séance was increasingly something that happened in private homes, away from reporters and investigators. Mediums travelled with smaller kits, a trumpet, a few pieces of cloth, perhaps a bell, rather than full spirit cabinets. The work was subtler, less showy. The ghosts no longer danced, they whispered. And yet, for all its reduced grandeur, the séance retained its stubborn appeal. It fit neatly into the lingering Victorian obsession with mourning and remembrance, while adjusting just enough to survive. The trappings were pared down, but the emotional hook remained the same. The possibility, however slim, of hearing from someone lost. You attend one of your medium's final sittings before they quietly retire. The room is small, the group familiar. The table doesn't rise, the harmonium stays silent, but the candlelight still flickers just enough to make the shadows seem alive. The medium's voice is softer than you remember, their pacing slower. At the end, they place a small folded scrap of paper in your hand, a message in the same handwriting they've always used. You slip it into your pocket anyway. When you leave, the night air smells of coal smoke and damp stone, just as it did years ago when you first stepped into their parlour. But the city feels louder now, more modern. Electric street lamps humming faintly, a motor car rattling over the cobblestones. You realise the séance you've known belongs to another time, a piece of Victorian theatre that has been slowly fading with the people who once filled its seats, and yet you suspect it will never vanish entirely. It will just keep changing costumes, swapping lace and candlelight for whatever trappings the next generation finds convincing. The ghosts will keep coming, or at least the people pretending to summon them will, and there you have it, the Victorian séance in all its smoky, candlelit absurdity. Proof that if you want to speak to the dead, there's always someone willing to dim the lights, shake a table, and charge you for the privilege. Now, if you somehow still want to learn more about this charming era of theatrical fraud and scented gauze, you're in luck. I've got another story waiting that'll make you feel even more grateful for your modern LED bulbs, fraud laws, and the fact that strangers no longer expect to hold your sweaty hands in the dark. And so, you've somehow survived the full length of a 19th century stagecoach ride. You've been rattled, flattened, baked, chilled, dusted, and possibly developed a permanent relationship with a wooden bench. Congratulations. You've officially earned the right to limp dramatically into the nearest saloon and order something strong enough to make you forget the smell of your fellow passengers. But before you do that in your imagination, remember this. You just sat through a historical deep dive into what was basically the Uber pool from hell, and you didn't even have to pay the fare. You didn't have to fight for legroom with a chicken in a basket. You didn't have to pray that the guy next to you would stop humming. You didn't have to deal with wheel repairs in the middle of nowhere while a suspicious coyote stared at you like you were lunch. If your brain is still weirdly awake after that, good. It means you're ready for more. Because history is full of equally ridiculous travel nightmares, questionable hygiene choices, and ideas that seemed smart at the time but absolutely weren't. So stick around, watch another video, and let's keep exploring the moments in history that make you say, "Wow, glad I missed that." Or better yet, let it play while you fall asleep and dream about riding in a stagecoach that actually has suspension. Spoiler, it doesn't exist.